Lovely, thank you. Thanks, Chairman. We're now live streaming. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Tuesday's meeting of Scrutiny to make a change. We'll start with the minutes of last meeting. Could I check, is there anyone who's prepared to propose those minutes? I've got Mark, anyone to second? I've got Robert. Are there any comments on those minutes before we move to a vote to accept them? Tim, just before you speak, is this about the restricted part of the minute or is it about the open part?
Right, it is merely the fact that they are restricted is what I would like to discuss. So I'm not discussing any of the detail.
Okay.
Because we did actually have this discussion, and Mark Stinson did sort of agree that some of these could be in the open, and yet we don't seem to have actually got anywhere. So I'm uncomfortable that yet again absolutely everything is going below the line, especially since we'd had the discussion and said that that there were elements of this which it was felt that that could be disclosed.
Okay, so I note your view. I suppose as a next step, Tim, if we're being sensible about it, it may be worth you seeking the restricted minutes or the information of those restricted minutes under freedom of information, and the legal officer can then determine what in those minutes can be released under that act. And I would be comfortable that that would mirror almost exactly the sort of amount of minute that could be made public, because of course the exemptions are broadly the same under the FOI Act and what we use to go exempt. And then once you've heard back, if you're unhappy, you can then appeal that to the ICO and we can get a determination from the ICO as to what should be restricted and not. At the moment, we're going to keep those minutes restricted because of course the committee voted last time to take those items below the line, and we haven't voted to identify individual aspects of those minutes which should be taken back up. But I think that would be the fairest way and would probably save the most time for the committee if you're happy with that approach.
Okay, I will pursue it that way, but I'm going to make an active abstention to the minutes then. I'm going to actively abstain to agreeing them today.
And we will actively note your active abstention. Could I see all those in favour of approving the minutes, please? And could I see all those against? And could I see any abstentions? Thank you. Okay, so those minutes are passed. The second item is apologies and substitutes. Are there any apologies or substitutes you're aware of, Teresa?
Thank you, Chairman. I believe that there is an apology from Councillor Nairn, but I don't have any substitutes. Thank you.
Thank you. We note Councillor Nairn's apology then. Chairman's announcements, there are none. Urgent business, I am not aware of any. Declarations of interest, are there any members who have any declarations of interest they want to make under the items coming up in this meeting? I see none. Non-members wishing to address the meeting. I'm not aware of any non-members who want to address the meeting specifically under this item. As usual, if any non-members wish to speak under substantive items, then I will of course allow them to speak. Sorry, some technical difficulties there. Which brings us to our substantive item, item 7, the Integrated Shared Management Structure and Joint Working Arrangements Review. I believe, Nathan, you're going to do the presentation, but just before you do, I have Tim waving at me. Tim?
Thank you. Yeah, more sort of a point of order. Following
I'll accept your point of order if you tell me what bit of the Constitution you're bringing it under.
Okay, this is to do with disclosure of information for the meeting. I'm concerned that, okay, this was discussed at Cabinet a week ago, and at that time it was stated that there was a detailed piece of work which sits behind this report, and it gives value and quantitative data to the evaluative scores. And I asked whether that those appendices, as they were called, could be presented here today. And I sent an email to Mr. Elvery, and I've spoken to Sam Chapman-Allen about this. But I see that there is something additional in this report, but it doesn't appear to be these quantitative data. So I'm concerned that we're being asked to make an assessment when we don't have all the information. So where is this?
So Tim, if I may, that isn't a point of order. So I'm going to stop you there. I note your view, and it's probably a view that would have been better presented during the course of the debate on the item if we're being really technical about it, because it's simply a point that you're making, which is that you have insufficient information to arrive at a conclusion today in the meeting. But just for future reference, I won't take that as a point of order because it isn't. But if you wish to make those points during the course of the debate, then you are of course free to do so. And are there any other indications from members before I let Nathan present? I see none, so Nathan, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So I will just do a quick introduction to the report, so plenty of time then obviously for questions and observations. So all members will be aware that the integrated shared management team and joint working arrangements between Breckland and South Holland have been in place for nearly a decade. And that partnership has been very successful in terms of delivering improved outcomes for local communities and making substantial savings for both organisations. So back in October, following the departure of the chief executive, both leaders agreed for three reasons that it was a good time to review the strategic partnership. I think just again to put that into context, the joint strategy board that exists, that oversees the joint arrangements, had reviewed the joint arrangements in 2015. So roughly every 5 years, the joint arrangements are reviewed, and this would be on the same time frame as well, and that's good practice. So those three reasons were obviously the departure of the chief executive herself, and before both leaders and both organisations made the decision to replace the chief executive, to look at the joint arrangements and see what options were available moving forward. It comes at no surprise to any members in terms of the continued response to COVID-19 and the pandemic, that for a reasonable while now, both organisations have worked on a placed-based way of operation to make sure that in terms of partnership working within the county regions that they exist within, and the responsiveness to communities, that's been as effective as possible, which of course is the right decision to have made in the pandemic situation. And although Lincolnshire and Norfolk were not invited in the first round of the latest local government reorganisation proposals, obviously, as you all know, both organisations sit within a different county, and in order to respond effectively to local reorganisation, and there is rumours that there will be a subsequent invitation to many county regions soon, that in terms of reviewing the situation with regard to the partnership, it was a good time to review the situation with regard to local government reorganisation as well. So those sort of three driving reasons commissioned a review, and that review was to be delivered in 3 stages. So this is the first stage, which is recommending a preferred option. So I'll just pause there for a second and just clarify what a preferred option means. So it doesn't mean the detailed business case to support a preferred option. And I think, as Tim was describing earlier, a lot of the quantitative information would form part of that business case moving forward. We can talk about that a little later in terms of questions. The second stage will be to develop that business case for the preferred option. And the third set of decisions would be to implement such a business case for a preferred option. So all that's being decided or will be decided on the 24th and 25th at council meetings is to move in a new direction for both organisations. And that recommendation to be to a new local strategic partnership, and pursue that as an option moving forward. So what that doesn't mean is there is the detailed business case supporting it. And what that doesn't mean at this stage is we are implementing those preferred options. We are taking a signal of direction. That's the way that the partnership wishes to move forward, based on the information that you have in front of you and the additional information that was included as a subsequent appendix. So the evaluation that is set out in section 6 of the report and is supported by that additional appendix evaluates the 4 options, and those 4 options are as is, so to stay with the existing arrangements, to improve the existing arrangements, to look at the standalone opportunities and options for both councils, and to an option of a new local strategic partnership for both organisations. And local in this context, meaning a partnership within the same county region as each organisation. So obviously one in Norfolk and one in Lincolnshire in this case. The evaluation was undertaken effectively 2 parts. So there is an options appraisal evaluation that was undertaken by the programme board that I mentioned there in terms of governance arrangements. So that's myself and the directors of the organisation, and the scores for that option appraisal are contained within the report and are the additional work that's set out in the additional appendix that you received. And then recognising that each organisation has its own political sovereignty and its own identity, those scores were weighted for an options weighting appraisal that gives you the options appraisal weighting for that political preference for each organisation. So you will see set out in the report a slightly different weighting for each organisation. And then those 2 evaluations were brought together in a set of scores that gives you the running order of, in first place for both organisations, a preferred option of a new local strategic partnership, in second place a standalone authority, in third place improving the existing partnership, and in fourth place an as-is option. So for both organisations, the recommendation that is being made or will be made to both councils is to pursue the same preferred option for each organisation. So in order to achieve those things, there are 4 recommendations that are set out within the report. The first is the preferred option itself recommendation based on the evaluation that I've just outlined. Secondly, is to begin the process of ending the existing arrangements through the memorandum of agreement that's in place. So it says, and I always apologise when I say this, but I'm just referring to the nature of the wording in the memorandum of agreement. So I'm referring to the clause and section 8, which talks about the termination arrangement. So that sounds very final, but I think I would add there, that's only because that's the memorandum of agreement's wording. I think, and I'm sure Sam and others will say, that this is not an ending of the partnership. This is a natural evolution of the next direction for both organisations, off the back of substantive benefits and substantive savings made from the partnership, and indeed a lot of knowledge and wisdom that's been gained over the last 10 years from working in partnership. The third recommendation is to put in place an interim array for both organisations, and what is proposed at the moment, subject to consultation, is an interim structure, and that's to give all members assurance that both organisations, up until the point of where a new preferred option, a new preferred partner can be identified, and that recommendation to implement that new partnership, that both organisations can exist as standalone authorities for that period of time. So there's a lot of work that's been done in terms of proposing that structure, as I say, subject to consultation with staff, and subject to decisions that have been made by both councils. That consultation would start on the 1st of March through to the 31st of March, and then an implementation phase over April to put both organisations into a standalone position by the 1st of May. And then the fourth recommendation is subject to that consultation, if there are only minor changes to what is proposed, to delegate that to the head of paid service in consultation with the leader to make sure that any final changes can be implemented at pace. And I think that's a good recommendation on the basis that we're trying to balance, I guess, 2 things, which is the potential uncertainty and anxiety for staff as we work through these changes, but making sure at the same time that we've got appropriate decision making and governance in place as we move forward. So if I pause there, Chair, and subject to anybody else wanting to add anything at this stage, pause there and take any questions and open up for debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. Do any members have any comments on the presentation or indeed on the report itself? Councillor Burt and then Councillor Kuipert.
I guess this is going to be a partial repeat of questions I posed at Cabinet, but perhaps I can flesh them out a little bit more. But first of all, I must say that I have no problem at all with separating from South Holland. I think this is actually a sensible move. but it's not because of this report that I've got that view. I mean, you've said in the report sort of 2.13, the theoretical benefits you've been through, but I think, you know, the 54 miles apart is a really serious problem with the carbon footprint in our climate emergency. And you said that there's been money saved, but actually it's very hard to evaluate when officer time, these executive senior officers are actually split 3/5 of the time. So you're not, you know, comparing like with like. And in 4.1, you have acknowledged that there is a governance overhead. But, you know, setting that aside, as I said, I have no problem with separating, but I do have some issues with the report in that the way it portrays the information loses detail. You've assessed 8 appraisal criteria, but these appraisal criteria are very complex, continuous data that has been distilled down into a single ternary digit. You know, it literally is one stage away from a binary yes/no. And that introduces, technically it's called a quantization error in our engineering terms, but it means that you've just lost all of the detail. But then going on to multiply that by a political weighting of 5, that swamps the data in any case. So you're actually ending up, because you're using these small integers and multiplying them together, you can see very easily see that there's a problem, because you actually can't make in this product, you can't make 11, 13 or 14, which completely skews the summing of the data at the end. I mean, you can't actually multiply these two things together. It's like saying I've got some apples and I'm going to multiply that by how important food is. It just doesn't make any sense. And that's why I don't think that this report actually, although, you know, as I say again, I don't have a problem with separating from South Holland, but I don't think this report actually gives you the evidence to be able to process, to go along that way. The other thing is that in the report, it very clearly gives an evaluative score for the new local strategic partnership. But we don't have a new local strategic partnership. How on earth can you score it? Because you don't know what it is. I mean, it might be that you end up with a strategic partnership which ties more hands and is more difficult than the as-is situation. You just don't know, because we haven't got anything, and yet we have been able to evaluate it. Part of the problem with this scoring scheme and these missing parts is that you end up with something where you can't actually evaluate. There's nothing which says that a score of 87 is better than a score of 86. It just doesn't, because it doesn't make sense that way. And in the table that you produced, where you've scored the put them in order to come up with our preferred option, the as-is situation is so bad. How on earth did we get to a situation where the as-is so bad? I think
Tim,
one of the things that Sam Chapman...
Could I encourage you to make the questions a little more discreet in the spirit of integers, so that they can be answered?
Well, I think the issue here is that this is not an integer. That's a point I'm making, is that it's not an integer. It's a floating point number.
I mean.
Yeah, but I'm coming back. It's a floating point. Okay, look, there we go. Start off with that then, and let's see how we go.
Okay, so Nathan, I'll come back to you first and just say, so broadly, could you provide a defense of the methodology? Although I will, I'm happy. Yes, Roger, I'll bring you in after Councillor Kybird. I am happy to say that I don't think this is a science, this decision. So I think there is limited value to numbers. But anyway, your defense of the methodology would be useful. And there was a separate question that I picked up, which was around why the status quo had results which were poorer than Tim expected. If you could comment on those two, and then we'll move to Robert.
Yeah, so Tim has made a number of very good points, and I think so. Let's talk through how we bring together an evaluation process that, by definition, is comparing a circumstance as in the existing partnership that we would understand in detail, and evaluating that against options that we have yet to fully realise or a business case has been developed. So what we've sought to do in the criteria that have been identified is, and I guess use the principle of Wednesbury here. So have the things that have been taken into account reasonable to take into account, and has anything that should have been taken into account not been taken into account. So in the question of the criteria, so the criteria are a sound basis for evaluating both the opportunities and challenges that any local authority would face, particularly when it's operating in a difference of place, as Tim's rightly identified, and the challenges that it has in operating in those places are well articulated in terms of the operation arrangement for senior staff and their partners, and sitting in within a different county location. So what we've sought to do, first of all, starting with the criteria, is to put in place some fair and reasonable criteria for which you can assess each option against. Then in terms of assessing those options, if I just run through the methodology that was applied, so for each of the appraisal scores that are set out in Table 7, each of the individual director officers and myself evaluated those options individually and separately, and then we came together as a programme board to compare and contrast and challenge before we came up with a single evaluation score for each of those options. And the same was true for the weighted score, where each cabinet member in both organisations evaluated those scores separately, and we came together as a cabinet to compare and contrast before we came up with a profile score as a collective. Now, members will be familiar with evaluations of contract and tenders, and there's a mixture often between qualitative and quantitative information that's provided in tender responses. But one of the things that helps bring together in a tender evaluation is to quantify and qualify each of those evaluations in terms of a score. So what we sought to do in terms of the scoring that you see in front of you and set out in Table 7 was to bring together the evaluation that is both qualitative and present that as a score, so that it was easier to understand the comparable outcome of each of the options appraisals. So you could have, and we chose not to, you could have simply said on the appraisal score, which one of the options scores higher or medium or lower, and just simply done a table that says, the number of times that this option scored high was this, and the number of times it scored, medium or low was this. That if you had done that, you would have still come out with the same evaluation, because the new local strategic partnership scores higher in response to that criteria on more occasions than another. So for the sense of bringing it together and making it, giving an overall evaluation, it is why we converted the high, medium and low scores to a number indice, so that we could use that number indice to bring that together to provide the scoring here. So I think if, in terms of Tim's question around the options appraisal, you can see on the options appraisal prior to the weighting evaluation that the options appraisal run in order: new local strategic partnership, standalone authority, improving the existing partnership, and as is, was still the same order. The marked difference as you applied the weighted score was to give more of a gap, I guess, between each of the evaluated options, but you still have that same evaluation option at the appraisal score. So in terms of the assessing the new local strategic partnership and indeed standalone, obviously that's a tough thing to do when you don't have a fully developed business case for each. So I think, as the report said, it hasn't been evaluated on any particular option or any particular combination of partnership that may develop and may come back to members to decide as a business case, but it's been developed on the basis of which opportunities might be available to the authorities moving forward if they were to forge a new partnership, and the difference being, in this case, compared to the existing partnership, a new partnership with a new local being, as I described earlier, a district within the same county region and a bordering district within that county. So some of the options and appraisal are quite evidently available, because you would be choosing a partner which meets these criteria. So you wouldn't go into a relationship and say, because we have these criteria here, you'd go into a relationship and look for these opportunities and this criteria to be developed, because that is the criteria which you're seeking and the criteria which you've evaluated the options on. So say, for example, where some of the evaluation has been on the scale of ambition, you'd want to seek a new partner that shared your same level of ambition for your communities, because if you didn't, you wouldn't be able to deliver those opportunities. So I think this not only sets out the evaluation for these options, but it also sets out the evaluation criteria that you'd use to sound out and develop that business case. Now, as I said right at the outset, Chair, this isn't a decision to implement this option. And coming back to Tim's question around quantitative data, this is a decision to pursue a preferred option of this direction. So as you pursued that, you'd bring back, as part of the business case development, what a new partnership was capable of delivering in terms of the quantitative data and the scale of benefits. But in the same way as lots of authorities venture on new partnership arrangements, this case it's slightly different, because in order to take forward the opportunity, we have to take forward both the opportunity to pursue that conversation with a new partner, but by signalling to new partners or new potential partners the ending of the current relationship. So that's how we've arrived at the evaluation methodology. And I think, as Tim said in his question, he doesn't disagree with the outcome, but there's a question I'm happy to take some more questions on in terms of the process that's supported in this report.
Thank you, Nathan. So I will encourage slightly more brevity in questions and answers for the next set, because otherwise we'll only get around about one councillor every 15 minutes. In fact, it's been 17 since Tim started. But thank you, Tim, for the detailed question nonetheless. Robert, your question.
Thank you, Chairman. Looking at the options summary results on page 46, there isn't a huge amount to choose between the standalone authority and the new local strategic partnership. And I think the new partnership is obviously envisioned as an ideal partnership arrangement, which if you can't achieve it, you'd probably be better off with standalone. So my own inclination would be to keep one eye on the standalone option in taking this forward.
Go ahead, Nathan.
So I think Robert, you identify the value there of the weighted score. So in terms of then the opportunities that are available to Breckland, you'll see in terms of the evaluation some slightly different scoring as a consequence of that weighted score. And I think that reflects what you've just described. But in terms of Breckland's opportunity moving forward, there's a much closer relationship in scoring terms. But I think if that were to translate down to how that feels on the ground for you as an organisation, I think there's evidence to demonstrate and show that you've got many partnership arrangements as an authority, not just with South Holland currently. If you look at the number of partnership arrangements that you have and how you are achieving and delivering your services, a number of those partnership opportunities spread within Norfolk as a county and indeed beyond. And I think that demonstrates why, in terms of the future opportunity of a new local strategic partnership, there is certainly something to be gained in that moving forward. But it also demonstrates your strength as a standalone authority in that a number of those benefits are already in place and a number of those benefits are about to come in place. And I think one of those is around your new waste contract partnership is a good example of that moving forward. So I think that's why there's a greater degree of closeness in those scores compared to South Holland.
Thank you.
I was surprised in terms of the actual number of partnerships we're already engaged in, and obviously those are independent of having a shared management structure at the moment. So It's the shared management structure that gives you the cost saving. It probably gives you the extra score over and above standalone.
Do you want to come back at all on that, Nathan?
No, that's absolutely correct. I think the again, and it's probably worth just saying that, isn't it, Robert, in terms of that clarity, that what we're talking about today is the arrangements of the integrated share management team and joint working. So what you already have the benefits of and future benefits coming on board is the service sharing across authorities. This would be the ongoing future benefits arrangements of finding a new partner to which you could share management teams and potentially other shared working arrangements that you have with South Holland currently, but which you could develop further with a new partner.
Great. Roger.
Just briefly, Chairman, for me, I fully support this report. We are where we are. South Holland, the partnership with South Holland District Council has clearly been of benefit to Breckland residents in saving money. So we are where we are with that. Clearly with COVID, it makes sense at the moment to pause that relationship, take stock of where we are. And for me, I think the scrutiny, the detailed scrutiny at the moment, I'll be honest, it sounds like a lot of sort of technical jargon being spoken at the moment. We're looking in the rear view mirror, and what we need to be doing is looking at the next step in the process. What potential is there out there for a future shared arrangement, maybe with another partner a bit closer to home? And that, to me, once that work has been done, that's where we need to be doing the very detailed scrutiny to make sure that that's the best option for Breckland residents. I think we could sit here and spend hours talking about technical jargon and and the risks and everything that's in the report. Frankly, to me, that's of limited interest at the moment. I'm more concerned about how we're going to move this forward. The next stage is the bit that needs a detailed scrutiny. But I support the report. I thank Nathan for it. The leaders brought him in for his local government expertise, and I look forward to the next step. And at that point is when I will have probably more to say when I look at that and I can scrutinise that detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Ian.
Thank you, Chairman. I've been in strategic management and analysis and planning for much of my life. And when you come to the conclusions, it does actually often people turn around and say it's a statement of the blindingly obvious. And to some extent, that is what has emerged from this report. Given the circumstances, the options of as is or improve really aren't on the table. You'd have to have both parties wanting to be happy to pursue that. And given the direction of travel of the two different counties, neither of them look a particularly attractive proposition. We haven't got the facility to stay as is for the long term. You then come, and as Councillor Atterwell was just talking through the standalone and local partnership, they are obviously good options. Local strategic partnership on the right terms is obviously a positive to consider. However, I think quite a lot of the discussion so far, and the real danger, and the one issue I would take with Nathan, because otherwise I think the report is really is generally very positive, is there is a tendency to try and reduce assessing these options to something like a tender evaluation. And frankly, this is not a tender evaluation. This is a strategic decision as to where we wish to go in the future. And I think that can at times mislead people as to the weight and the accuracy of the calculations going behind the numbers, and to the extent that it can actually distract from looking at what the key issues are. And yes, the next stage is going to have to be the one of a lot more detail. And what I would be asking for is that the standalone option needs to be seriously costed, seriously set out its risks and negatives, because if there isn't in the near future a strategic partner, then this is the option that we have got to make work until we do find, if there is one, a new strategic partner. And we need to be confident that the organisation that we are looking to develop as Breckland on its own continues to maintain the effective organisation we have, which the officers have done brilliantly with the place-based operation during COVID, at the same time as returning for our residents, the distinction of being the lowest district council tax in the country. Now, that's going to be quite a hard one to square, and we're going to need a lot of information and a lot of analysis to make sure that this thing has been thought through and that we are as robust as we can be when we actually emerge from the other side. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ian. Are there any other members? Yes, Terry.
Thank you, Chairman. I think a couple of members have sort of covered now that for me, there's not a huge amount of debate on the actual report and what's being proposed. I think is interesting that there's such broad support that I think even Tim mentioned that he's in support of the proposal. So that kind of gives you an indication of the broad support. I think what, for me, I'm particularly interested in, and I don't know if Nathan's able to comment on this, the benefit of the shared arrangement, obviously a significant portion of that is financial. But certainly as a member, I've always actually appreciated the opportunities where we've had to sort of review the sort of working practices and what goes on at South Holland. I remember being part of a constitution working group and looking at their constitution and thinking, oh, that's how they do it, perhaps we could replicate that. And certainly when our senior officers have sort of dropped in, well, this is what happens at South Holland and this is what we've heard of that happens in Lincolnshire. I've always found that really, really useful. And I just wonder, Nathan, if there has been a sort of an exercise where we've done our best to capture the learning over the last 10 years from the shared experience, because much of that learning will be useful moving forward if we share with another council or we bring in other partners, how we share the right approaches, the sort of physical, practical aspects of it all. That for me is probably more important than the debate about whether we sort of terminate or not. It's a foregone conclusion. What we must do is make sure we learn from it and capture that experience and put it to good use in the future is really where I'm at. So I don't know, Nathan, if you can comment on that, because no doubt you've considered some of that as you've been producing the report. Thank you.
So Terry, I mean, absolutely. In terms of certainly in terms of the evaluation, and it's mentioned in a few places in the report in terms of the experience, I guess, knowledge and wisdom that has been gained by both organisations in working in the spirit of partnership over the last 10 years. So we haven't captured it in sort of sense in a document at this stage, that learning experience. But as we're moving through to developing how you would pursue your new partnership opportunities, what in this case Breckland takes with it in terms of that learning experience, having delivered that well, but I'm sure on the way there's been lessons learned that you wouldn't wish to repeat moving forward. So you take both the positives and eliminate some of those negatives moving forward. On your wider point about, and I think it's a really good point in terms of the learning that can come particularly from scrutiny. I think one of those things that you've naturally had is the benefit of the partnership in place, but obviously that doesn't stop the benefit of inviting some partners alongside you, other district councils, to form part of your scrutiny approach when you're looking at things in relation to your individual organisations. So I think I've described it in the report that there's a maturity that I've recognised in this partnership, and that's not because it has been going for as long as it has. I think it's the maturity that you've just demonstrated here at Scrutiny in terms of the collective, what's the right way forward for your communities and your local places, but also that in making a partnership work as it has worked, undoubtedly that has been through numerous decisions and numerous scrutinies over the years. And I think the collective outcome of all of that needs to be captured, because there's a real opportunity not just for both organisations to learn from that moving into new partnerships, but for the whole of local government, because when this was originally set up, this was a case study for local government. And I think there's something to be said about how these things have moved forward and what that natural evolution is for the benefit of whole of local government moving forward.
Thank you, Nathan. So I'm getting the sense from members, of course, there are others who are able to speak if they wish to, but I'm getting the sense of members that we're coming to a consensus We've got 4 recommendations in front of us, which were the recommendations from Cabinet to full council. Our job here today is to consider those. I see you, Tim, I'll come to you shortly. Our job here today is to consider those 4 recommendations and decide whether or not we have anything to add, or whether we're going to approve those recommendations to go through to full council unaltered. And I will just see whether I have a member and another member who wish to propose and second that we take those recommendations as is to council. If that proposal gets made, then I will allow Tim to speak on that motion, if that's in order for Tim. So I've got Councillor Mark Morris, Councillor Fabian Eagle, proposers and seconders. I'll now allow members to speak on that motion. So thank you for bringing that motion forward. Mark, I'll let you speak first and I'll come to Tim.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I do remember the original negotiations that transpired between South Holland and Brecon District Council back in 2010 and ended up with the partnership agreement in 2011. Now, that was brought forward under circumstances which are not pertaining today. We had a financial crisis earlier, a couple of years previously. We knew that local government was going to be a little bit strapped for cash. And this, I think, was the third district council that we'd actually approached, but it was done by 2 very strong leaders and two very, very cooperative and trusting cabinets at the time. I think now we're in a different situation. I think the place-based governments we've had to implement through COVID is putting a strain on the relationship in terms of our officers are now working here and their officers are working there. And I think that will pertain for the next 2 years, 2 or 3 years. So we're now, I think, looking at the economy rather than, and it would have to be something which is co-terminal with us as a district council, but share borders. And I think somewhere in Norfolk as well. So I don't think we can ignore where we are now and what would need to happen to our partnership. And I think the 4 recommendations that are in today's meeting I fully endorse, and which is why I put my hand up to recommend them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Tim, you wanted to make a point.
Thank you, Chairman. Of the 4 recommendations, I mean, clearly I've already indicated that recommendation 2 I wholeheartedly approve of. I think that recommendation 3 is a necessity at the moment, but I'm concerned that recommendation 1 is actually saying we are going to we're taking this preferred option that isn't yet an option. We don't know whether there is another partnership yet. And I think some of the things that have been said by other members about us, and specifically our waste contract, recent waste contract, I mean, that's demonstrated that we can actually come up with these without going into a full partnership with a neighbouring borough, for example. So I think option 1, recommendation 1 is a problem because we're saying we're voting for something that we haven't got. So I think if that could be changed, no, for me to support that, I think it would need to be changed to something that perhaps we go with the separation and seek new shared partnerships, and then we'll just see where we go with that.
Thank you, Tim. And just so we fully get your position, then, do you have any views on recommendation 4?
On the basis that I'm not supporting recommendation 1, I'm not thinking I can support recommendation 4 because of the open-endedness of it all.
Duly noted. I think that may be a semantic point, but will be, of course, for members to cast their votes as they see fit. We can have a preferred option which may or may not come to pass, and by definition we'd be unable to execute that preferred option and have to go for a less preferred option were the preferred option not available, is my view, and how I would look to cast my vote. Are there any other members who wish to speak on the approving of these recommendations, or shall we move to a vote? And Tim, before you say, would you like me to split out the recommendations into individual ones so that you can register your votes differently? Indeed, I will do that then. So Could I see all those in favour, please, of approving recommendation 1 as is in the report? Please all show your hands clearly, and I will vote on this as well. So that is everyone except for Tim, I think. So, and then anyone against? And Tim is against. Thank you. And I don't think anyone's abstaining. That's right, isn't it? Good. Then could I see those all in favour of recommendation 2? Thank you. Any against? Any abstentions? Seeing none, that's passed unanimously. Can I see all those in favour of recommendation 3, please? All those in favour? Thank you. Any against? Seeing none. Any abstentions? Seeing none, that's passed unanimously. And can I see all those, please, in favour of recommendation 4? All those in favour? Thank you. All those against? 1. Any abstentions? Seeing none. Okay, thank you. In which case, I'm pleased to say that brings that item to a close. I thank Nathan and, of course, all of the officers and members who've put so much time into that report for their work today. And I will just, before I move on to the final item on the agenda, if you'll indulge me, we have a governance and audit meeting on Thursday in our usual slot, in fact. Actually, don't hold me to that. I'm not sure if it's in the afternoon or not. It's certainly on Thursday, so on our usual day. And you may have noticed that you as Overview and Scrutiny members were invited, and that is because item 13 is the discussion of the constitutional point around Overview and Scrutiny powers, where we had a very good debate previously. However, the constitutional route is for that to go through governance and audit, and kindly we have got Bill Borrett, the chairman there, to agree for us all to be allowed to attend should we wish to make points on it. So please do, if you feel strongly and wish to make the points that were made at the scrutiny meeting previously, please do go along to that meeting and make those points so that governance and audit are fully cognizant of your views. Apart from that, I don't think there's anything else. Is there anything members want to raise before I close the meeting? No, excellent, in which case the date of the next meeting is the 4th of March, and I thank members for their time. Councillor Wickerson, yes,